Joining us right now on the phone to discuss this is Newsmax.com Joe Schwerdt, who's one of the managing editors of the site there. And Joe, as we look at this poll here, 6 out of 10 Americans, nearly 6 out of 10 Americans, think the president does not have a good handle on this crisis.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising, John, and good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, when you consider, you see the images of what's going on down there, you consider the fact that a lot of people think that the border is not secure. It's not surprising that his poll numbers are not doing well on this issue.
You know, of course, President.
It's also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut in. We've been running around the newsroom a little bit today, so I'm a little breathless, as you might hear. But anyway, what's also surprising is how his disapproval rating among Latinos is very high.
Yeah, that is interesting, especially when we remember back to the president being called, quote, the deporter-in-chief from the director of La Raza, the advocacy group there for immigration rights here and immigrant rights as well. Now, how did Republicans fare in this poll? Did it take a look at how the nation feels about the way Congress and Republicans are handling the crisis?
Well, I think that it's safe to say that his approval rating among Republicans on this issue would be very, very low. Let me call up the story here now, John, and I'll and we have
looks like we got 22% of the nation. It says Congress is doing a decent job on this issue here. So neither group, neither one of the parties here really kind of responsible for dealing with the situation, Joe,
right.
Are getting a vote of confidence from the American people.
Yeah, Republicans in Congress are very faring very poorly in this issue, and there's a few of them, 1 in 4 Americans, about 23% approve of how Republicans are handling the issue as well. So people on both sides of the issue are doing poorly in the eyes of the voters.
Now, as we drill down into these numbers a little bit more, Joe, another number I want to talk about is the fact that a majority of Americans in this poll, some 53%, do approve of the president's proposal, the nearly $4 billion he's asking for from Congress to try and solve this. And I would assume, and I don't know if you've had any additional information come to you to shine light on this, but it seems like Americans want something to get done.
Well, I think that's it, John. I think that people see it as a way to address the issue, but if you drill down, you see that perhaps the idea that a lot of that money isn't being used for deportation, but it's being used for essentially maintaining the situation, not actually moving forward on it. I would imagine the poll numbers might be a little different if people actually drill down into the numbers.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So we'll keep our eye on that poll and try to get more insight on the pulse of the American people, how they feel about this issue. But it doesn't look very good for the president or for Congress as both sides try to work out a solution here. One other aspect of this story that kind of broke open yesterday, Joe, was this undocumented journalist who's appeared on CNN. He's got a documentary. He's actually testified before Congress. And he was detained yesterday. His name is Vargas. Juan Antonio Vargas. He was detained yesterday at an airport in Texas here. What was your response, considering you've worked in the press for a long time? This guy serving as a member of the press, per se, and also kind of becoming part of the story here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't think he intentionally made himself part of the story, at least from what I gather. So, from that regard, I don't know that he crossed the line. But it is very interesting that he wound up being part of the story and getting mixed up in it as he did. Of course, it certainly puts him in the spotlight, which I can imagine that he would not be opposed to. But some of the comments we had were like, well, why wouldn't he be detained if he is undocumented? I mean, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, and again, this is really going to give us a case study because you have a very high-profile figure here in Vargas who's being arrested, detained, and has now been released. So as his story plays out in the press, a lot of folks who are tuning into this are going to get a better idea of the processes that take place when someone has been detained and is lined up for deportation, or at least processing through our immigration courts here. Now, I'm going to try to call up the video if we can get that ready. I don't know if we have it on deck yet or not, but if we can, Joe, one thing I noticed is that some of the video reports that are out there right now, Vargas, is they had him walking up to airport security and then getting led away here. It was all captured on camera. Obviously, he's in a highly touted documentary. He's worked for, I think, for CNN here. He understands how the media works. There was nothing to you that seemed maybe a little contrived about the Vargas arrest?
It's really hard to tell, John, and I don't want to speak out of turn on that. But I would have to think that he would have not objected to the fact that he was put in the spotlight on this issue. And on the other side, I don't know that there was, anything contrived regarding his, from on the government's end, from his, on his being detained. But this can only benefit his name in the long run as an advocate and as a journalist to become part of the story.
Now, whether you agree with him or not, I think a lot of folks have to respect, I guess, in some ways, the steps he's taking here. He certainly seems to be willing to be somewhat of a martyr for this issue. We're not saying in effect exactly that this was contrived. I'm just kind of saying it looks a little bit to be that case. And Joe, in your career as a journalist, I know you've covered governments, big and small municipalities, and any time there's a crisis, a lot of times what the city council will do is they'll make a big deal. They'll try to present an issue in a way that it shows is going to cause the most pain, the most, I guess, politically expedient story that they can tell here. And it seems almost as if that could be something that's playing out here before these cameras. This guy has been in front of the cameras before about the immigration issue, and maybe that's what's taking place again.
Yeah, I don't know how you felt, John, but I always felt uncomfortable when it felt like I was being lured into the story as being part of it. But other journalists feel differently in that regard.
Yeah, no, and Joe, I agree with you. It's never, it's been tradition where you don't become the story. You are a dispassionate observer of the story. Of course, this is the 21st century, and the rules are changing and being written every single day when it comes to
changing every day, John, every day, yes.
Yeah, no, of course, the other thing about all of this here, and I want to get your take, and if you can maybe give us a gauge on how you think the issue is being handled as someone who's covered politics in the past here, with the attempts of some folks on the right to balance out the compassion of this crisis with the need to do something concrete here. We have a soundbite from Terry Barnstead weighing in on the immigration crisis. We'll play that clip, and then Joe, I'll get your take on the other side.
I do have empathy for these kids, and I want to make, but I also don't want to send the signal that send your kids to America illegally.
Of course, Joe, that you can't talk about this issue without election year politics, without the optics and the importance. It might be a little uncomfortable for you again, because I know you don't like to become part of the story, but I would like to get your take on how you feel about the way some folks are trying to balance both sides of this story here. Compassion for the kids, but the need to do something about security.
There is no question, John. I don't think anyone would disagree that there is a humanitarian crisis going on here. And nobody is saying that these children should not be treated humanely and given what they need in order to survive. But that doesn't mean that at some point that they should not be processed and it should not be determined whether or not they need to be deported or allowed to stay in the country. I mean, I think they're separate issues, and I hope they're regarded as separate issues. They should be. These children are here. They need to be clothed and fed, and they need to be cared for. But again, that doesn't mean that they should not be processed and that the law should not play out and their futures determined by what a judge or what the government ultimately says needs to happen to them.
And what's the famous quote, Joe, from F. Scott Fitzgerald? The sign of a highly intelligent mind is being able to hold two opposing ideas in your brain at the same time. We don't want to discount the opinions and the willingness of folks to go down to the border and actually stand in the way of some of these illegals crossing the border. But at the same time, you said it best, there has to be some sort of balance here as we try to talk about finding a starting point to work towards a solution on this issue.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. John Boehner said yesterday he was expecting a GOP solution to this issue by the end of the week. Looking at a way to how to counter the president's $3.7 billion plan to perhaps pare down that the amount of money and come up with a better solution as to how to spend the remaining amount. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
So we here at America's Forum, like you there at Newsmax.com, keeping a close eye on Capitol Hill for Congress's and specifically the GOP's next move. What are they going to do here? As we mentioned at the very beginning of this segment here, the new poll numbers showing that a majority of Americans do like the president's plan, that $3.7 billion. Also, Newsmax CEO and editor-in-chief Chris Ruddy here on America's Forum yesterday saying that Republicans should see this as an opportunity, embrace the president's plan, and make some substantive progress on immigration reform. Joe Schwerdt of Newsmax.com, digital editor. Always great to get your take on these stories, and we appreciate you willing to get a little uncomfortable with your take on what's playing out in the media on this immigration issue.
Thanks, John. Anytime.
That's our pleasure. There you have it, Joe Schwerdt, talking about some of the issues in these poll numbers, guys. Some good news for the president. Majority of Americans favor his plan, this $3.7 billion plan, but also a lot of folks, 6 out of 10 Americans, do not think he has a firm handle on how to solve the crisis. And as we mentioned, a lot of attention now, a lot of the onus is on Congress to find a solution because this problem does not seem to be getting any better. Much more to come here on America's Forum. We'd love to get your take on the immigration issue. What about those folks in Oracle, Arizona, showing up there to stop a bus of school kids headed to their community? Reach out to us on social media. We're back with more in just a few moments.